Statistically, there's actually one injury from a car accident every single minute in the United States. And did you realize 27% of collisions recorded are actually considered total losses? That's up about 42% in the last 5 years, simply because the high overload of technology and increased prices of new car parts. Things have gone off the rails, and I've learned the hard way about our wrecked Honda here recently that we found out that we've been driving around for the last 4 years. We bought from a dealership here recently in the city and found out after we wanted to try to sell the vehicle because it was time to trade up, that the buyers were pulling Carfaxes, car proofs, and realizing that the car had an accident history to it that we were unaware of. See, because when we bought that car 4 years ago, there was a Carfax provided by the dealership, and on the Carfax it showed a $2,000 accident, and we were pretty fine with that. We thought that shouldn't be a big deal. But unfortunately, we learned the hard way because we somehow either didn't do our due diligence or a wool was pulled over our eyes, because the way it worked out, after some of these prospective buyers here this last couple of weeks start to find out after pulling the Carfax, there was actually a $15,000 hit on the vehicle that was repaired on our Honda Civic, and sadly enough, the vehicle was only worth $8,000 on the retail market. So how did the insurance company actually advocate for the repair on that vehicle? I have to admit, since we realized we have a Honda Civic that we're trying to sell that's been wrecked, I've learned a few things. I've done some research, and I found out the hard way. In fact, there are some other statistics that are very alarming these days. For example, did you realize if you get your vehicle in an accident, and if it's even repairable, and it's deemed ready for the road and ready for service again, did you realize that you're going to give up 25 to 35% of the value on trade-in? That's right, that vehicle immediately has lost its value, what they call diminishing value or diminished value. Unfortunately, there's lots of countries that won't even compensate for that. So you get into an accident with your car, and let's just say the insurance company says, yeah, it's within the recommended amount, we'll pay for the repairs, and it can be fixed. Even if you were driving along, minding your own business, and some careless clown decided to come up and rear-end you, totally out of your control, now you're on the hook. Did you realize that? And your vehicle has immediately lost a significant amount of value, to which you will not be compensated. Now, there are places and parts of the US, from what I understand, that will provide that diminished value. So let's just say your car is worth $40,000, it gets in a collision, all of a sudden you want to trade it in, the dealer says we're only going to give you 30 because of that value, because of that accident. Well, that 25% differential can actually be made up, but in Canada, that's absolutely not the case. You're definitely going to wear that, and you're going to eat it. And in most cases, even if you're on the losing end of this conversation, you unfortunately are going to lose in the end, paying out of pocket. Sometimes having an accident, it means time away from your car, rental cars, it means hassles, it means dealing with insurance companies, negotiating the replacement value or repairs of your vehicle. It just becomes an absolute nightmare. But unfortunately, buying a car that's been repaired without you even knowing it is almost the worst nightmare, because now it's almost unsellable. And I was watching a video by my good buddy there, Will Motivation, who was selling his Porsche 911, and he had commented during that time that he had a near miss where somebody almost rear-ended his car. Unfortunately, this is all too common, and I'm driving along frequently and I see people tailgating me, people running red lights, people carelessly driving, and even possibly just driving, backing too far and running into a wall or a bollard or some other issue. And sometimes even in parking lots, cars are subjected to accidents every single day. As a matter of fact, statistically, in 2023, there was over 5 million accidents that required medical attention, and there's about 1.57 for every 10,000 vehicles on the road. So you know accidents are happening at an alarming rate. Things are getting out of control. People are careless. People need to pay attention. But unfortunately, this is always going to be a thing. And so as a result, when we buy a used vehicle, we have to be thinking about those things, the triggers, the signs, the symptoms. How do you protect yourself, not just while you're on the road? I mean, insurance sometimes can fix some of these vehicles, but remember, diminished value wipes out a lot of the value. We spend a lot of dollars to buy our vehicles and then have it wiped out by somebody who's carelessly driving and runs into us. That's clearly not a good scene. But how do we avoid buying such a vehicle that maybe was ran into and now, of course, was relatively carefully repaired? How do we fix that? How do we find out? How do we even know what we're getting into when we find these vehicles and we're out shopping for a used car? Like, here's an example, our little Mercedes-Benz. How do I know by looking at this vehicle, when I do a nice little walk around, how do I know that this vehicle hasn't been in a major collision? How can I tell? by looking at this vehicle, if this was used on a car lot, that I wasn't about to buy something that was in bad shape, that had an accident history to it. Because remember, what you don't want to do is see this vehicle, and you might even be okay owning a vehicle with an impact or an accident history to it. But remember, you should be getting a major discount. Remember, I already said between 25 and 35% discount if you're going to buy something used that actually has a history to it of an accident. So how do you tell? Well, there's definitely some things that I've learned along the way about how you can tell and not buy yourself something that's been crashed. So first of all, it all starts with just a general walk around. I mean, the first thing you're going to want to do is, if you're shopping for a car, is look at the lines, look at body lines. You know, I look at a car like this, and this body line should all be consistent all the way along. Things should be flush. Body lines, the same. Body lines should be the same all the way around. Look at the entire vehicle all the way around, and you should have a level of consistency that seems to make sense. When you're looking even at a hood, you shouldn't have a bigger gap here than a gap here. You shouldn't have one side that sags down a little bit. Maybe a headlight that's kind of got more space in here. Watch for those little signs. The other thing you want to do is check for overspray or signs of mismatched paint. What you don't want to do or see is cars that have paint that don't match. And I've seen this quite frequently. You know, it's not uncommon to get a little fender bender on the front fender here, and yet then the door looks a little bit off. And you can really tell in certain lights when you've got the sun shining on it, and then maybe in the shade, you can sometimes see that tone difference. And a good body shop will do a blend. Even if they fix this panel and they paint it, they might just blend that in. But what you want to do is take a good look back in certain lights, and you are able to sometimes see the differentiation between one panel to the next. So make sure those panels are all looking very, very much the same. Now, a word of caution, sometimes plastic panels with age, particularly white cars, will start to yellow, whereas the metal panels won't. And so sometimes it might look like they don't match, when in fact they actually might be the proper car and they might be the proper original paint, but sometimes that can give it away. Now, that being said, other things you want to look at: overspray. You look at a car here, lift up the trunk, the engine lid, look up the rear trunk right there, open up doors, look for overspray. Areas like this, you know, are you missing grommets? That might be a sign that they had something disassembled and didn't put everything back together. Are you missing some of the stickers and stamps? Like on the driver's side, you're going to have stamps and stickers that sit in here. Are they missing? Are there overspray on there? Is there overspray on here? Do you see a little bit of extra blue paint on that? Just maybe a little bit of speckles that you see on here. Maybe some of this trim isn't on there right. Maybe this isn't nice and tight. And it should all match from one side to the other. Those are giveaways. Overspray, and of course body panels or body moldings that aren't included that should be there. You might be missing some parts. That is also a sure giveaway that there might have been some sort of a collision along the way. Another giveaway, if you happen to be driving a car and maybe have the convenience, this is sort of an optional thing. If you're going for a test drive and you maybe have a friend or a family member driving in a car behind, get them to follow you right behind, because sometimes vehicles that have been in bad collisions start to dog track. In other words, dog track if you had suspension damage or if you had some major structural damage, sometimes a vehicle will actually drive, instead of straight down the road, it might drive at a bit of an angle like this. And you might find the rear wheels out a little bit and the whole vehicle is driving down the road at a slight cocked angle. That can be a sure sign as well. And I've actually seen vehicles like that frequently. Usually a sign that it's been in a major accident, and definitely something that you don't want if something structural is done like that. Another thing you've got to be worried about are a lot of modern day cars like these, or they're using unibody suspension, unibody frames. A lot of the old school vehicles have basically body panels slapped on a frame. Well, that's okay. Those are pretty robust. A lot of pickup trucks run that. But a lot of modern SUVs, small cars are running a unibody. So the chassis and some of the body panels are all sort of one, or all the body panels sort of built together to create that common rigidity and that chassis. So if you have damage to places like the rocker panels like that, that could in fact implicate or be a problem for the rigidity and the solidity of your chassis, and that could be a safety concern. So you want to stay away from anything that's a unibody vehicle that has had major damage on rocker panels, or in that section at the back here where you can see this whole rear section becomes all one. As you can see, this all becomes one big common sheet. As you'll notice, that's one piece because it's a unibody. Up front, a panel can be replaced on the front, but the back section is another story that's part of the chassis. As you'll notice, it starts here, there's a line there, and it goes all the way around, ends here and ends down there. So there you also don't want to have any damage, rockers or areas like this. Now, taking the vehicle for a test drive is always sometimes going to flush out issues, both mechanically. Maybe you're looking for brake issues, suspension, clunking, banging, weird engine noises. Those are all things you want to look for when you're buying a used car. But also, a vehicle that's been in a collision sometimes gives itself away. And I've driven vehicles that have a weird rattle maybe on a body panel, or they don't fit right. The door kind of has a rattling noise on one door, maybe the other doors are fine. Or driving the vehicle down the road and you notice it maybe doesn't track straight. Those are all possible indicators of both a mechanical issue or even potential body damage of some sort. So always make sure that everything checks out the way it runs, drives, should be quiet and smooth. And that goes for every aspect of buying a used car, whether it's, again, you want to make sure mechanically there's nothing to fix, but you definitely want to make sure that the body is intact. And then some people use the old magnet trick. You know, a lot of times back in the day, cars would become damaged, they might hit it, and somebody would slap together some Bondo in there and filler, and then they'd sand it out and respray it. But Bondo is an old school technique, and not only that, a lot of times people will not want you to go any further than just a basic inspection. Why? Because remember the old magnet trick, where sometimes you would grab a magnet and you check, sample different areas, and you put a magnet on there. If it sticks, that meant you were good. Stick it there, it's good. You stick your magnet there and it sticks, that means there's no Bondo there. Then you take your magnet, you stick it here and it sticks, that's good. Or you stick it here and it sticks, it's good. But trust me when I say, nobody with their car is going to want you putting a scratchy magnet onto their paint job. Nobody wants that, and certainly you're very limited with what you're going to find out anyway, because most cars today actually have plastic body panels, and a lot of these metal panels nowadays are actually aluminum in many cars these days. A lot of the European manufacturers are creating aluminum or some other kind of pot metal fabrication with a lot of their body panels. Sometimes there's composites, carbon fiber, you name it. And a lot of these vehicles now are made of materials that are not ferrous. In other words, do not contain iron, and therefore a magnet will not stick. So ultimately, the best bet is leave the magnet at home on your fridge and don't even bother bringing it to the car. So another thing I learned about getting screwed by this scam and this repair and this wrecked car that we had, this Honda, is of course you're going to ask the dealer, but that's going to put the check and balance in place. Ask the dealer for service history. Make sure that you find out not only what the vehicle's been through, brakes, condition of it, mechanical inspection, they're going to do that, but make sure that they provide you with a Carfax or Carfox or whatever you want. But realistically, what you're going to find is you take them with a grain of salt. Really, that's more a check and balance for whether you can trust them or not. And so what I would always do is get them to provide a Carfax, get them to provide the checklist if it's gone through the shop, if you're buying from a dealership or some other kind of independent shop. Make sure that they provide you with that paperwork, but don't stop there. Also, make sure, I would strongly suggest any vehicle that's worth over $7,000, $8,000, $10,000, $15,000 and above, always get a pre-purchase inspection at an independent shop. Because I don't trust any of these dealers any more than I can throw any of them, including the biggest guy in the back shop. I don't trust any of these guys from my experience, and getting hosed as badly as we have now in a couple of situations. A strong suggestion is, if you're gonna buy a used car, always get a pre-purchase inspection done at the dealership. Say for example, this is a Mercedes that is being sold on a Honda car lot. Take the Mercedes to the local reputable Mercedes dealership or that particular branded dealer. Get it there, they know all the ins and outs, they know what the issues to watch for, and they'll do an inspection. Might cost you $300, $400, but it's money well spent. On top of it, even if they provide you with a Carfax, it's proof. Right now with the situation with our Honda that it got wrecked and it had a $15,000 wreck on it, when we bought our Honda Civic, at that time, the history of its injury, of its $15,000 accident actually happened a year earlier. It should have been on that latest car report. It should have easily been on that Carfax, but it wasn't. So it really begs the question, is that accurate? Did they get the latest information, or did they pull a Carfax from many moons ago, maybe before that accident? I don't know. Either way, the trust is really not there anymore. And unfortunately, we're at a place right now where you really can't trust anybody these days. These dealers, you know what, you take them all with a grain of salt. So whatever you do, get their Carfax, but do not sign on the paperwork until you slip away. Say, look, I need 10 minutes. You go and grab the VIN number, this vehicle identification number that you're gonna find right down in there. It's either written there, or it's always written there. And you can also find it in most vehicles. You can find it somewhere either down on the jamb, sometimes on the door panel, or definitely on the pillar here. And you'll find the VIN for that vehicle right there on the factory stamp. And as I've said, those stamps better be there, and they also better not have overspray on them. That's another clear sign. But also, with that said, grab that VIN from there or there, make sure they both match, and then of course take that, slip away, say, look, I need 10 minutes, I'm gonna go grab a coffee or a water, and then go to the Carfax website and pull your own Carfax report. Check it right then and there before you put a deposit, before you let them do a credit check, and before you sign on the dotted line. Now, why would a dealer try to scam and pull a fast one over on you and not tell you about accident history? Well, it's quite simple. Number one, if the car was clean and didn't have any accident history, they could actually sell it very easily, just like we found out with our crashed Honda. Everybody who saw it and drove it loved it, and they all wanted it. And it wasn't until the time that they pulled the Carfax, that's when they decided the deal was off. You see, so if a dealer's trying to sell a car, which is the business they're in, they don't want any hiccups, they don't want any burps or any headaches, they just want that car to come and go. And that's one of the major reasons. Another reason why they may not tell you about that, which of course it has to be disclosed if the vehicle's been in a collision. There are laws like that, consumer laws. But let's face it, we all know better than that, that there's so much shady business going on in the car industry right now that I wouldn't put it past anybody to lie. And we saw that during the C word, you know, during back 2020 and 21, even the end of 22, when there was such a shortage of vehicles, the car lots were doing anything. They would put their old junk that was 10, 15 years old on the lot, jack it up 25, 40%, and people were still buying that crap sight unseen. And in many cases, people didn't care if it had collision damage, people didn't care if it had scratched rims, uneven panels, worn out seat bolsters. People just were not fussy. People sadly let their guard down, and it created a lower common denominator that was much lower than the expectations that we've all grown up with. You know, we always assume that, you know, to buy the best car your money can buy, get a best deal, don't buy wrecked vehicles, get a vehicle that's well maintained. Those are all good rules of thumb, but trust me, you know, 2-3 years ago, all bets were off, and people were buying just about anything a dealer would put on their lot. It's so sad. And now it's at a point where they've created that as the norm. And so now people, unfortunately, are willing to buy a lot of junk. And that being said, it's not all is lost. Maybe you find the car of your dream. Maybe it's that only car you've ever seen in that color. Maybe it's that car has such low mileage and it's so nice in many other ways that maybe you just say, look, I know it's got a $8,000 claim against it. You know what? I want to buy it anyway because everything else about it is nice. It drives perfect. It's been fixed by one of the best shops in town. You might be okay with that, and that's fine. Some people are just fine with that. All of the other boxes are checked. But as long as you're aware of that, and as long as you take that into account, that if you decide you're going to sell it in 5 years from now, that you will have a tough time selling it. The saleability or sellability of that crashed car is going to be very difficult, and you're going to have to actually give it away almost, because very few people want to even touch a car that's got accident history, even though contrary to the idea, and we saw during 2021, 22 that people just didn't seem to care. A lot of that was just people weren't doing due diligence. It's not that they selectively wanted bad cars. They would just buy whatever because they couldn't get anything else. But trust me when I say this, if you choose to buy a crashed car, as long as you do all the checks, everything else checks out, and you're going to keep it basically and run the wheels off it, if you're going to basically leave that vehicle in your possession and you want to drive it until 2, 300,000 miles, 400,000 miles. Don't care. The plan is to keep driving it, and then maybe hand it down to your kids, hand it down to their grandkids. And who cares at that point? You're going to run the wheels off it. Then it doesn't matter if it had a little $8,000 repair that was fixed by the best shop in town. Then it might be something to consider. But generally speaking, if there's even a thought that you may have to resell it at some point, you definitely want to try to avoid a wrecked car. On top of it, if you are buying a car and it gets flushed out that there's a Carfax and it has accident history on it at the dealership, then make sure you plan for that amount. They're going to try to nickel and dime you. I've seen these dealers, they play these games. Get your average retail price. This is what I'm starting to realize. Get a good, healthy, average retail price for that make and model and year with features. Get that number, okay? Remember, that's a retail price. Then check Black Book and try to understand that space between Black Book, of course, and full retail. That's kind of somewhere where you want to be. That's for an unwrecked car. Then, of course, it's like I said, if you're negotiating on a car at the dealership and they have one that meets all your criteria and you're willing to take it, regardless that it has that little accident history, remember, they need to knock at least 20, 25, 30% off the price of that vehicle. Now, if it's a $2,000 car, and it's, you know, it's a 22-year-old car, it is what it is. They knock $100 off, you're fine. All I'm saying is if you're looking at a car and it's maybe a 2023 and it's only got, you know, 30,000 miles on it, that car is pretty close, pretty high up in the depreciation curve. You still want to make sure that they're going to knock a substantial amount. I'd be looking for 30, 35% off of the price of that vehicle right off the top. And if they don't want to give that to you, walk. Go find a car that hasn't been wrecked. But the best course of action, ideally, is avoid these wrecked cars altogether. If there's one thing I've learned, I've always tried to stay away from wrecked cars. Now, I know it's a bit of a magnet. It tends to pull you in because you see all these cars in the sea of cars that cost so much money, and then you see this outlier that's, you know, $10,000 or $15,000 cheaper than the rest. And then, of course, oh, you find out it had an accident history. It's such a bummer. But it is tempting. It's very tempting to buy that car. But just know that, of course, you've got to get the discount. You've got to get a major discount because there's a good chance you'll never be able to sell that car again unless you basically give it away. And with all of that said, right there, check out the history on this whole wrecked Honda story and saga. As it continues, we still don't have total resolution, and I haven't yet heard back from Carfax. Hope to see each and every one of you real soon, everybody. See you then. Bye-bye.